Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Very interesting story, and I've actually gotten a lot of questions about this, and so I want to take a minute to talk about it. But I think it's actually a very cool story as well, as on Monday morning, it was announced that Steph Curry, yeah, that's Steph Curry, former Davidson legend, Davidson alum, is going to be the assistant GM at Davidson, his alma mater, okay? Why that's noteworthy, really two reasons. One, everybody's hiring GMs these days. It's all the rage. I have some people asking me in the comment section about Kentucky, Louisville. Will they hire GMs? We'll talk about that in a minute. But it's also noteworthy because he is still in the NBA. And so, yeah, he's going to be pulling part-time duty as he gets set. You know, he's probably got, 4 or 5 years left in the NBA. If that, I think he's 35. He'll be 37 this year if he isn't already. I think he turns 37 later in March. So, you know, he's coming towards the end of his NBA career. He's looking at his future, and he is going to be the assistant GM at Davidson. First of all, before we get into what a GM does, let me take 30 seconds and just credit Steph Curry, okay? I think over the last couple years, and maybe it's not going to be so much this way in the NIL world, but kind of, 4 or 5 years ago, like when everybody was anti-NCAA, it was like kind of like trendy to kind of trash on your alma mater, trash on your school, like, oh, yeah, they made so much money off me and I made nothing. And it's like, I don't know if I'd say that, or, it'd be like, oh, I should have gone to an HBCU, or it didn't matter where I went. Like, I seem to remember, and I'm not trying to be critical, I seem to remember like DeMarcus Cousins kind of saying something about like, just wish I had gone to an HBCU. Why did I go to Kentucky? It's like, dude, DeMarcus, I know everybody on the team. I know all the coaching staff. You had a blast at Kentucky, so stop it, okay? Well, I bring it up. Steph Curry, to his credit, just gave a great statement about what Davidson meant to him. He said, the Davidson experience is top-notch. My journey from when I got to Davidson in 2006 to now demonstrated that I had the opportunity to play basketball at the highest level, get a great education, an amazing network through the Davidson alumni, and continue to wave the Davidson flag. I want very talented, high-character student-athletes to have that same experience. So first off, it's just cool to acknowledge, like, this school was awesome. It changed my life. Thank you, Davidson. So that's one. But two, I think there's really kind of two different questions within this conversation, okay? A lot of people are asking me, what is Steph Curry actually going to do for Davidson? And then I think the bigger question is, what does a GM do for college basketball? And so I think you kind of have to answer the second question to get to the first question. What does a GM do? And then what does that mean that Steph Curry will do? I think what's interesting to me about the GM conversation is that every school, it's actually a little bit different, okay? And I want to specify that because I think when we think GM, we think of the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball. I'm sure hockey has GMs as well. I don't know much about them. Where it's basically they're drafting players, they're signing free agents, they're negotiating contracts, they're in charge of the minor league system if such a thing exists, et cetera, okay? College basketball, everyone is a little bit different, okay? Because the role is a little bit different. What I would say is at most schools, the job is not to negotiate with players. It's not even to pick players. It's basically to actually be the middleman of both of those sides, right? So at most schools, like, North Carolina just hired a GM. Hubert Davis is not asking the GM who to recruit. The GM is not doing recruiting. What the GM's job is probably at North Carolina going to be, and this is similar at most schools, is to basically be the conduit between the coaching staff and the collective or whoever handles the money. In other words, at North Carolina, Hubert Davis is basically saying, look, these are the three guys that this is the guy we want out of the portal. We're in his final 5. This is the money that he's asking for. He'll commit, but we got to get the money together. And so that guy's job is now to go to the collective, negotiate with, get with the collective people to make sure the money's in order. Now, I think in some places, it might actually be to raise the money yourself. So in some places, it's not so much of a conduit. It's more of a money raiser. You're out in the community. You're talking to people. But at the big schools, that's largely done by the collective. What I think is also interesting is that at some schools, it's actually the opposite. You have very little to do with the collective, very little to do with the money, and you're basically really an ear to the ground kind of talent evaluator. Okay. So let me give you an example. Texas Tech, I think is actually doing this at a really high level, and I don't think a lot of people realize it. Texas Tech's GM is a guy named Kellen Buffington. Okay. I don't know him personally, but he was a guy that for years ran high school events in Texas. Knows every AAU coach, every high school coach, ran events. I think may have coached AAU. I apologize. I don't know as much about his background. But he was basically brought into Texas Tech to keep his finger to the pulse, keep his ear to the ground on everything going on. Who are the elite high school players? Where are they considering? Is it about NIL? Would they consider Texas Tech? What's going to happen in the portal over the course of the offseason? Who wants to enter? Who doesn't want to enter? Who's thinking about entering? All of that. It was interesting. I don't think he would mind me saying it, but, Justin Young has a similar role at BYU. I don't know if he's technically the GM, but he's another guy with an AAU background. And so he basically said, like, my job is to, like, we're BYU. We're a little bit different. We're not going to be for everybody. So, hey, who would be interested in coming to BYU? Who would not be interested in coming to BYU? Who would come to BYU for the right NIL money? Who doesn't care about NIL? There's so many variables. And so at some places like a Texas Tech, like a BYU, it's more of a player, not really evaluation, but just your ear to the ground, who would be interested, who would come, who wouldn't, stuff like that. So I think it's all a little bit different. By the way, and this might be the most noteworthy one relative to Steph Curry, I think probably the most notable one relative to Steph Curry is like an Adrian Wojnarowski. So Woj at St. Bonaventure. Remember, this was a guy that was an NBA reporter and had all these contacts in the agent world, in the the shoe world, etc. And so you've seen Woj. Woj clearly is not a talent evaluator. Woj is a guy that's kind of using that relationship to create NIL opportunities for St. Bonaventure. So how do we get more games on TV? How do we get a new shoe deal? How do we get this? How do we get that? That's what Woj does. And my guess is that's going to kind of be what Steph Curry's role is with Davidson. He's not going to be evaluating players. I don't think he's going to be negotiating contracts, to say the least. I think what he's probably going to do is he is probably going to be in a scenario where basically, one, he's just a huge ambassador for the school, right? I don't even know what the NCAA rules are anymore as far as if, who's allowed on what Zoom calls and who's allowed at what visits and this and that. But I assume if there's a kid in the portal, they need to close the deal. If it's NCAA compliant, I'm not accusing Davidson of breaking NCAA rules, but my guess is they'll get Steph Curry on the phone. They'll say, hey, can you have a conversation with this kid? Can you close the deal? Blah, 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 this and that. Two, I'm sure he's going to, through his network of things, create new opportunities for Davidson. And basically, I think he's going to create some new opportunities, right? If that's something with his shoe line, he has his own shoe deal. He works with Under Armour. Davidson has an Under Armour deal. Is there a way to connect Davidson with a special Steph Curry exclusive and a percentage of the sales goes to Davidson? I don't know. But to me, that's probably the most realistic way. I don't know, what other, relationships Steph Curry has in the endorsement world, so like, let's just say hypothetically he works with Gatorade. Is there a way to get Davidson players into a Gatorade commercial? I don't know. Really quickly, I've seen a couple other people ask me this. Specifically Kentucky and Louisville, are they going to hire a GM? Listen, I believe in the next 5 years, I think everyone's just going to have this role. Bottom line is you just need somebody, like I said, the coaches have to coach. And you need somebody to, again, be the conduit between the athletic department and the money people, right? The best example, I think, is probably Rachel Baker, the original GM. Duke was the first school to hire a GM. And John Shire was basically just like, I need somebody. I can't be chasing donors. I can't be negotiating with kids. These are the players that we want. You work with the school to make sure that the money's right, or with the collective to make sure the money's right. And I think that's where most schools are going to go with that GM role. And I think everyone's going to have it. So somebody in the chat said, do we think Kentucky and Louisville are going to get them in the next 5 years? Yeah, I do. It's too much for these coaches. They you've heard every coach say it, but at a certain point, they're not even worried about coaching anymore. They're trying to raise money, do all that. So I think it happens. I think it's coming soon. I think it happens everywhere.